What's good, fire starters? Welcome to episode 4 of Into the Fire, a podcast where we talk about the psychological and mental health issues that are plaguing the artist community right now. I'm Alex, and I want to open your mind to what really goes on under the hood of creatives. Let's go! So I was trying to get prepared for this episode, and I don't know, I like to watch videos beforehand to kind of either pump me up or get me inspired. And I ran into this video on Lil Peep and how he overdosed on Xanax. And I watched the whole, it was a Viceland video, and it basically went into how terrible Xanax is right now, especially in England for some reason. It's an epidemic almost. Everyone's taking Xanax or fake Xanax because they're suffering from anxiety, depression. And it's almost like, it reminded me of like the ecstasy type of craze that happened in the UK in like the 2000s. And now it's Xanax, and it's a major issue over there. And the things I kind of pulled from that is that it's like a mainstay in a lot of music. And I thought because it was such that this would be a really good topic to go into. I planned on just looking at a book on how to solve anxiety with other avenues besides Xanax, because I used to take Xanax. I was prescribed to it. I hated it, and I've seen in front of my eyes what it's done to some of my friends, and I knew this would be really relevant. But after watching that video, I'm emotionally primed for this podcast. So here goes. I wanted to help out artists deal with anxiety through ways without having to see a therapist, without having to be prescribed Xanax and the like. And so this book that I read called When Panic Attacks, The New Drug-Free Anxiety Therapy That Can Change Your Life by David D. Burns, MD. It's a legit book. It is so thorough. I can't even begin to go through all of the techniques in this book, but I'm going to try to give you as much content without this podcast going too long. That's going to help you. If you're dealing with anxiety, or if you know someone who is, there are definitely ways to treat it that don't require pharmaceuticals and necessarily going to have to see a psychotherapist. I don't want to tell you not to go see a therapist, because that's wrong advice, but this book offers a ton of exercises that you can do now that for his patients, for Dr. Burns' patients, have been working sometimes within a week, sometimes within a few sessions. And that's no bullshit. So let's get into it. Before I go into the techniques, I want to mention one thing from the video that's still on my mind, is that by 2020 in the UK, 2 out of every 3 young people are not going to be treated for mental health conditions. And I thought that was massive. By age 14, half of people who are going to develop a mental health disorder develop it by then. And so basically, this, in summary, there's going to be a lot of young people with mental health conditions, and they're already self-medicating with Xanax especially. And it's as addictive as heroin. It doesn't take a psychologist to map out the trajectory of this potential. It is an epidemic. That's the thing that I didn't know it was as serious until I watched that video, and I'll link it in the show notes. But I'm still kind of, I'm glad I'm doing this podcast right after watching it, because it's just I did not know that Xanax was that much of an issue. So Dr. Burns, he uses cognitive behavioral therapy specifically. It looks at developing personal coping strategies that target solving current problems and changing unhelpful patterns and cognitions. What cognitions are thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes, behaviors, and emotional regulation. So the major thing here is that CBT is more effective than any type of psychotherapy or medication. In fact, CBT without medication appears to be more effective than CBT with medication. I've never been really a fan of therapy in conjunction with prescribing. I still think that medication as a crutch. And while it might help you get better while you're taking the therapy, I'm still, the jury's still out for me on, when you're done taking the medication, who's to say you're going to be able to combat those issues when they arise. Whereas if you're just using techniques that involve your own coping strategies, your own willpower, I feel like it's stronger than in conjunction with medication or just medication. And lots of research is proving what I'm saying. And the interesting part here is that the author began as a psychopharmacologist, and he was treating his patients with drugs for anxiety and depression. And he's found in his experience over the years, I think 20 years now, that using his drug-free treatment involving CBT is far more effective than using drugs. Specifically because this is the thing, you'll have the tools that you need to overcome the painful mood swings that people who deal with anxiety are going to encounter. With Xanax, the odds are high that you'll become physically dependent on them within 3 weeks, approximately. And if you stop taking them, you'll experience withdrawal effects, including severe anxiety and insomnia, which I can say from experience happened for me. And so the thing that I just find kind of ridiculous is that if you stop taking the anxiety medication, you experience more anxiety, far more anxiety, severe anxiety. That's just, I don't know, that just sounds ridiculous to me. That doesn't make any sense. I was prescribed Xanax because I was having trouble sleeping. I guess I was experiencing a fair amount of anxiety with my PhD classes and coursework I was going through, and it was super duper easy to get a prescription, way easier than I thought. I mean, I explained to the doctor what I just told you now. Having trouble sleeping, coursework is kind of stressing me out, and boom, like a few other sentences, and he's like, okay. The doctor even offered to prescribe me Adderall for I don't even know because he thought it would help me neutralize her. So if I was going too down, I could go high. I don't know. I can't really remember what he said, but it was kind of like, like an add-on to a purchase. That's what it felt like. So I would take like a half a bar of Xanax before sleep, sometimes a quarter, sometimes a half. If I took a quarter and I didn't fall asleep, I'd take another quarter. And yeah, it helped me sleep, and I woke up refreshed and all that. But as a studying psychologist, I knew that this was there was no light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. I knew that I was going to become dependent on them, and I did. I could not fall asleep without taking them. And if I stopped taking them, I noticed that I would have mild panic attacks. Nothing like hyperventilating, but I noticed that I would get really anxious, more anxious towards situations and events than I normally would. And I for sure was experiencing more insomnia. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Either I'm going to have to keep taking Xanax for the rest of my life to fall asleep, or I'm going to have to just fix it some other way. And small tangent here, in order to fix my insomnia, which I still do to this day, is I listen to audiobooks, and I got this headband called Sleep Phones that is like Bluetooth that connects to my phone, and it's a headband where the speakers on my left and right ears are like in felt, so that you can sleep on your side and it doesn't hurt your ears. And so I use that, and it shades your eyes if you don't like bright light in the morning. And so I listen to audiobooks before I go to bed, and before I did that, it would take me hours sometimes to go to sleep because I just could not turn off my brain. But now I'll listen to a book and I'm out in 20 minutes, which is just amazing to me. So there's not mentioned in this book at all, but if you're dealing with insomnia, try listen to audiobooks when you're going to sleep. Could be nonfiction, could be fiction. I listen to a lot of nonfiction, a lot of psychology, self-development books. And like in the video, I saw what Dr. Brennan says is the withdrawals from Xanax can be as difficult as the withdrawals from heroin. And that's why he never prescribes benzos for anxiety or depression. And it's just this, I don't want to like make this all about Xanax. Like people take Zoloft for depression as well. And a study done by the National Institute of Mental Health, they actually gave participants one of 3 treatments. And so they gave them either St. John's wort, which is like a homeopathic version of treating depression. They gave them Zoloft, which is one of the main prescribed pharmaceuticals for depression, or they gave the participants a placebo, which was most likely a sugar pill. What you guys need to take away from this is that in the study, 32% of the patients who received the placebo, the sugar pill, recovered from their depression, whereas 25% of the patients who received the Zoloft and 24% who received the St. John's wort recovered. So basically, more people recovered from their depression taking the placebo than they did from the homeopathic version of treating depression or the pharmaceutical version, which is ridiculous. Basically, the pharmaceutical and the homeopathic treatments worked worse than nothing. And Dr. Burns says that the drug companies try to hide findings like this, or they skew the results in publications, which I thought was alarming, to say the least. If this is a thing, that the pharmaceutical companies are hiding facts from us about the effectiveness of pharmaceuticals. And another study submitted to the FDA found that at least 80% of effects that we attribute to antidepressant medications result from the placebo effects, meaning that people improve after taking antidepressants not because of the antidepressant, not because of the chemical composition of the pharmaceutical. It's because they think that it's making them feel better, which is basically what a placebo effect is. Dr. Burns says that drug companies suppress the results of many studies that don't come out the right way, quote unquote, right way. So we're being duped by pharmaceutical companies. And maybe this is not news to some of you, but it's news to me. I didn't know that there was this much cover up, and I don't want this to be like some conspiracy theory type of episode, but this is something I definitely want to look into further. If drug companies are lying to us, this is something we need to know, especially after what I just explained from that video about how pharmaceuticals like Xanax are becoming an epidemic in the UK and obviously in the US, with all these rappers coming out kind of glorifying Xanax. And I got nothing against rap culture at all, but there's the way this is going with Xanax and lean and all these things that are being kind of hyped up in music. It's just, I can't see it being good in the long run. Dr. Burns says the drug companies don't want you to know about studies with the results that are unfavorable to the drugs they're marketing. As a result, there's a bias in the literature because the drug companies are extremely selective about what they publish. This leads to false perceptions about the effectiveness of antidepressants. The published studies nearly always seem to favor the medication over the placebo. Like, you guys need to know this, man. Like, this needs to be discussed more and more as pharmaceuticals are becoming more prevalent in medicine, in psychology, psychiatry, and in popular culture, in music, in artistry. We're being lied to. The evidence against pharmaceuticals, in particular antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications that Dr. Burns goes into, it's insane. He says that suicide rates of patients who received antidepressants in one study were nearly 3 times higher than the rates in patients who received placebos. People taking antidepressants are 3 times nearly as likely to kill themselves than people who receive nothing. So where do we go from here? There's got to be a happy ending to this, or at least some positivity we can take from all of this, not this madness. And so there is. Is that he calls it bibliotherapy, where by actually reading this book and implementing the techniques he gives, and doing the exercises, you can drastically improve your anxiety. And he makes a call to action to avoid these drugs like Xanax and Valium and what they're prescribing because they're addictive, and avoid taking multiple prescriptions at once. And to recall the first episode of the podcast, one thing that Avicii was going through is that he was experiencing a lot of anxiety and a lot of complications mentally because he even said because he was taking so many different drugs at the same time. And Dr. Burns says dangerous drug interactions can occur when you do this polypharmacy, and patients often end up feeling drugged and over medicated, and you can just tell that that's kind of what Avicii was going through. And so Dr. Burns says basically in this book, you have to do 3 things if you want to change your life. You're going to have to give up the certain hidden benefits of anxiety and depression. You're going to have to confront the monster you fear most. And you're going to have to do the written exercises. You're going to have to take action. And he says in numerous published studies, depressed and anxious individuals who don't do the self-help assignments between sessions usually don't improve. Sometimes they even get worse. Whereas people who do the assignments are the ones who experience the most rapid and lasting improvement. So there's so many exercises in this book to do that there's no way I could explain to you verbally how to do them. If you're experiencing anxiety, you need to get a hold of this book because it offers pages and pages full of blank exercises that you fill in and daily mood logs that you fill out about how you're feeling and what different coping techniques and tools you can use. And then you're supposed to write how you feel afterwards. And it's just, there's so much content in here that involves you taking action and monitoring yourself. I strongly recommend that if you're experiencing anxiety or if you know somebody who is, please get a hold of this book. And what I want to also import to you guys, because I want to create this on a creative level, is that if you alleviate this stress and this strain and self-doubt and these self-defeating beliefs that come with anxiety and depression, you end up being more productive and more creative because you feel more relaxed and your self-esteem is at a high level. And so it's very important as creatives that we treat our anxiety properly. And that's what I want this entire podcast kind of to be about, is not only to talk about the tough issues, but to really hammer home that if we can have control over our emotions and our mental states, we will be more creative and more productive in our artistic pursuits. And that's very important, obviously. So he has literally 40 different techniques you can do, because what he says is that for each of his patients, no two patients are alike, right? So some techniques would work on some patients, whereas other techniques would work better on others. And he recommends that you don't have to try all 40, but go through. So he has specific techniques geared towards specific problems that you may be facing. So he has techniques that are better for either chronic worrying, or panic attacks, or agoraphobia, which is fear of being in public places, fears and phobias, shyness, performance anxiety, and public speaking anxiety. This makes me think of and I know my friends that are DJs or who are producers who want to get into DJing, and they have this intense anxiety of going on stage and being in front of a lot of people and messing up. And I know I've been there, and I feel like this would be a great book for those individuals in particular, not just DJs, but any artist that performs, whether it be a concert pianist or a member of an orchestra, or it could be a singer, or it could be any artist who performs on stage. And when I say that, I keep going back to the documentaries I watched of Avicii and of Kurt Cobain, and they were experiencing crazy amounts of anxiety when they would go on stage. And which is why, in the case of Avicii, he began self-medicating with alcohol, and Kurt Cobain began taking a lot of drugs. There are a lot of techniques in this book that could prevent people in the future from having to resort to drugs and or alcohol to self-medicate, to get rid of that anxiety and that panic that can occur when you're going up on stage. And another thing that I found interesting that could immediately apply to us creatives is that procrastination I've experienced it almost on a daily basis because I just have so many things I'm doing these days. But procrastination to like get in the studio, procrastination to begin a song, procrastination to, work at your craft. And he says that this procrastination happens because of anxiety and, the stress that comes about of having to work on your art and possibly get in that state where you experience a creative block or you just get frustrated. And so instead we procrastinate and we say, oh, well, I'll do it some other time, or I have to do this instead. It didn't dawn on me until recently that our procrastination is because of anxiety. And in this book, Dr. Burns offers a lot of specific exercises you can do to get rid of that anxiety that specifically leads to procrastination. And I thought I'm going to read a paragraph of what he said about his take on procrastination, which I thought was really cool. He says, one of the biggest mistakes that procrastinators make is to wait for inspiration to strike. You may tell yourself, I'll do this when I'm more in the mood. I just don't feel like it right now. But what comes first, motivation or action? Most procrastinators think that the motivation comes first and action follows. Extremely successful people know that it's the other way around. Action comes first and motivation follows. They don't wait around until they feel like doing something. They just plow ahead and do it, whether they feel like it or not. If you wait until you feel like doing some unpleasant task, you'll be waiting forever. I know that I usually feel anxious when I start doing a task I've been putting off. I usually don't feel motivated until I'm well into the task. Sometimes I don't feel motivated until the task is nearly completed. The real question isn't can I do this task, but rather am I willing to do it? What would it be worth to me to get it done? And this is something I really like to educate others on. A lot of my students is that sometimes you just have to start it. Sometimes you just have to start. And I know you may not feel like doing it, and you keep putting it off. But once you get the wheels in motion, once you open up your DAW, once you begin playing your instrument, the momentum just keeps piling on itself. And within before you know it, you're away you go, and you're producing, you're making music, and it's not that hard anymore. But you just really have to get started. You really have to create that momentum, like I said, that velocity. And so before I know how this goes, because I used to be like, well, I'm not inspired today, so fuck it, I'm not gonna produce. But it really doesn't work like that. Like it doesn't. You're not just gonna be hit by the muse all of a sudden, and now you're inspired to make that masterpiece. I really don't think it's like that. I really feel like it's what Dr. Burns says, which is you just gotta plow ahead, man, and just start. You have to act your way into motivation. You can't wait for inspiration to strike. You just have to get to work. A lot of this book is action taking and facing the problem head on. And I'm super vibing with that. He says with some of his techniques, you intentionally expose yourself to the thing you fear and decide to stick it out, no matter how anxious you get. Instead of trying to escape or control your anxiety, you surrender to it. You try to make it as bad as possible for as long as possible. This is the exact opposite of what most anxious people do. When they accidentally confront the thing they fear, they run away as fast as they can. Many therapists fall into the same trap. They teach anxious people how to relax and control their anxiety. These strategies reinforce the idea that anxiety is dangerous and needs to be controlled. It's usually more effective to surrender to the anxiety. It's a lot like telling a bully, take your best shot, I'm not running away from you any longer. I love this shit. Like, face your fear head on. Like with prescribing, it's dulling you. You're essentially running away from the problem. You're avoiding the problem in essence. And that's kind of what he says. The main difference between people who suffer from depression and anxiety and people who don't is that the people who do suffer, they get stuck in these bad moods and they can't get out of it. They don't have the coping mechanisms to get out of this terrible mood. He says that minute of feeling upset turns into an hour, the hour turns into a day, and the day turns into a week, a month, or even years of misery. Like, we all experience depression and anxiety. It's just the people who don't suffer from it, they know how to break out of their bad moods quickly. And what Dr. Burns is saying is that this is something that can be learned. And when you have all of these tools at your disposal and you do relapse again, because he said that everyone's going to relapse. No matter what treatment you receive, you're going to relapse and back into an anxious or depressive state. But with these tools you have, you're ready to get out of it because you've trained yourself to surrender to the anxiety, and we've worked on it and done the exercises. And it's not as simple as popping a Xan and, relying on that as a crutch. So he ends with this really nice passage, and he says, one way to look at it is to imagine that every person, including you, has the potential for happiness, inner peace, self-esteem, and self-confidence. But sometimes it seems to be locked up in a safe, so you can't get to it. As a result, you suffer. We're going to work together to pick the lock. We'll try one combination, but it probably won't work. Then we'll try another, but it probably won't work either. Over and over, we'll fail. But if we stick with it, eventually we'll figure out the combination. Then all of a sudden, the door to the safe will swing wide open, and you'll feel happy and confident again. But you have to remember the combination. Write it down so you don't forget, because the door to the safe will swing closed again. If you know the combination, this won't be a problem. And this is what I'm talking about. We as individuals, we all have the same potential for happiness, and it comes from within. It doesn't come from any external sources or wealth or power or fame or prestige. It doesn't come from a pill. It doesn't necessarily come from a therapist. It comes from within. We can acquire these techniques and this ability to treat our anxiety, our depression, by training ourselves through these exercises that are in this book. Next week, we're looking at a book called The Upside of Your Dark Side: Why Being Your Whole Self, Not Just Your Good Self, Drives Success and Fulfillment. And this is something I'm really psyched about, because he looks at how anger fuels creativity, and how a certain amount of anxiety can actually be good for success, right? Like, we shouldn't run from anxiety. We should learn to deal with it as opposed to running away from it. Our mental health is at the mercy of big business, of corporations that want to make lots of money by giving you drugs that, according to many studies, are ineffective. You got to be willing to slay that fucking dragon, to look that anxiety or depression in the eye and say, fuck you, I'm going to defeat you. Mental health is becoming a major, major issue in our society, and we can't rely on drugs to solve the problem. It's going to make this more of a problem. If you got something on this podcast, rate, review, and share it with someone you love who may be experiencing anxiety and depression, who may have been seeing a therapist for years and years and years now and has gotten nowhere, who might be prescribed to various medications. Please have them listen to this podcast, and more importantly, please have them read When Panic Attacks by David D. Burns. And with that, turn off this podcast, get back in the studio, and get fired up.